it's about who shows up in your life when you're at your most broken and you're at your most lost and you're at your most in need of someone just understanding or someone being willing to be there with you and be there for you and to see you.
I am so pleased and honored to be able to introduce Deeyah to all of you. I hope that you have been able to see some of her documentaries. Steve and I were not familiar with Deeyah until we got a phone call. We got a phone call and we were traveling, I think, from work to home, and she was proposing to do a documentary and was asking about using some of our participants. And we've always been kind of skeptical about that. But what became very apparent to us was that when Deeyah starts exploring a topic, amazing things happen. And we later found out that when she shares, it is a raw truth spoken with courage, clarity, and a whole lot of heart. And her true art is her ability to get others to do the same. A two-time Emmy-winning filmmaker, a fearless documentarian, and a lifelong human rights advocate, she has spent her career doing what most people would never dare: sitting face to face with extremists, misogynists, and violent ideologues, not to sensationalize them, but to understand the forces that shape them and to illuminate the pathways out. Her work reminds us that transformation is possible, but only when we're willing to look directly at the hardest truths. She is also a celebrated artist, a global voice for women's rights, and a relentless champion for dignity across every line that divides us. Her films don't just inform, they unsettle, provoke, and ultimately inspire us to do better. Today, we get to learn from someone who embodies bravery, not as a performance, but as a practice. Please join me in welcoming the extraordinary Deeyah and this discussion between her and Steve.
My goodness. Thank you. What a bit speechless. That's incredibly generous of you, Dorothy. Thank you. I mean, I'm just in awe of all of you and I mean, you're doing the real work. I just get the privilege of getting to bear witness to some of it and get to learn from and sit with extraordinary people like you who do the actual work. So it means a lot to me. Yeah, your incredible words mean a lot. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, it's really nice to see you, Deeyah.
Likewise.
When we got the word that you were able to come and join us, it was like the world stopped. It's like, where are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? This is really exciting. And so we asked people if they would bring their lunch or show up on their lunch hour or relax and be off screen and just eat their sandwich and listen. And when we talked about me asking you questions or it's like, oh, this is maybe the easiest job in the world is just go ahead and just talk for an hour,
Just
Deeyah,
hang
and
out.
then
Yes,
we'll let you know if we're done with you or not. But I don't think that's
exactly.
enough. I just want to tell you that when that phone call came in, the
Mm.
first thing that happened was that Dorothy and I went, oh, good God, how bad is this going to go? And we've
Yes.
been in press, we've been in papers, and we're
Yeah.
never really been happy with, how things get portrayed.
Mm.
And we listened to the questions you were asking and your thoughts and what you were after. And it was
Mm.
like, oh, this is different. This is
Mm.
something different. And instantly we became curious and we started watching some of your films and seeing some of your work, and
Mm.
uh, really, really obviously changed our view, or you helped to give us confidence. Uh,
Mm.
But would you like to just kind of open the floor and just share a little bit about yourself, how you got into
Yeah.
this film stuff? I've heard some of your stories are just phenomenal. And would you mind just kind of starting there? How did you get into movie making?
Sure, sure. And because I remember that just before I do that, I remember that day as well, calling you. I remember I was in DC at the time. Uh, and I had been in touch with this amazing, amazing human being who I think is on here now, Spencer Murray. And I was explaining to him and going, look, this is what I'm trying to do, and how do I do this, and who do I speak to? And he was like, him and I had talked several times, and yeah, I remember remember just going, I really need to get to the heart of this. I really need to get to the humanness of all of this. And he said, I know who you need to talk to. And he instantly said, it has to be Steve and Dorothy. That's who you need to speak to. So I was, yeah. Anyways, I'm very grateful to Spencer for
I
making this all
I
possible.
had forgotten that part of the
Yeah,
story, and thank you
yeah.
for bringing that up because that's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very, very cool. And it was so generous of him and so kind of him to kind of open in that way. So okay, so how did I get into the film stuff? So I didn't go to film school. I don't come from a film family. I don't have lots of contacts in kind of the film and the media world. I have my kind of starting point was, and also not as a journalist, my starting point was as an activist, and as someone who's done a lot of work in human rights, but then with a lot of focus on women's rights, and within that a lot of focus on male violence against women. um, and so the I guess the kind of the thinking for me at the time when I first started was I was feeling really frustrated at how some stories were being told in our public discourse. And I felt that often the stories that were being told, the people whose stories that were being described, excuse me, were the humanity of those people. I felt like was being flattened. I felt like depth and the kind of the uncomfortable truths about what it means to be a human being was always sort of left out, and it was either good or bad, evil, black and white. It was very kind of binary like that. And so I wanted more depth, and I felt like the fact that we weren't responding in a more holistic way was also because we weren't speaking about it with the depth that these stories really deserved. Um, and violence, I realize, has been one of the topics that have been reoccurring in every single film that I've done. A lot of people have asked me, "Oh, is it extreme? Is it extremism? Is it terrorism? Is that sort of what you do?" And I said, "No, actually, it's violence. Whether it's violence that happens behind closed doors, whether it's that type of private violence, whether it's public violence." Um, and I think my obsession with it is that we can do something about it. It's not a force of nature. It's not a tornado. It's something that we've created. It's a choice. Violence is a choice. And so how do we choose away from that as a society? How do we do that? So in order to get to solutions, I first needed to look into what the challenges were, what the issues were. So I literally just picked up a camera, but did like tutorials online, practice lighting on a roommate's dog, which was a really bad idea because the dog never sat still. But and then I went to, because I used to do music, and I went to one of my music colleagues and was like, yeah, so this is what I want to do. I want to tell the story of this young woman, Kurdish woman in South London, who was killed on the orders of her family because she had fallen in love with somebody that she'd chosen, and she'd left a very abusive husband, violent husband, that the family had forced her to marry when she was 17 years old. And to add to her the horror of her experience is she'd gone to the police in London 5 times asking for help and was never believed and was let down, and ultimately ended up naked, strangled to death, buried in a suitcase 6 feet underneath an abandoned house in Birmingham. And so what did we as a society do or not do? What did the police do or not do? How do we how do we deal with some of what happens in our societies, and how do we all take responsibility for that? So I wanted to tell her story, and really wanted to do it because I wanted to give the film away for free. Just wanted to have women's groups use it as an awareness raising tool and a campaigning piece, an educational tool. And that was it. That was the kind of extent of what I wanted to do. So it was just an extension. Filmmaking for me was an extension of activism and trying to do my part, my little part. The film got picked up by a broadcaster. They submitted it to various awards, and it ended up winning an Emmy and a Peabody and all kinds of stuff, which just was never the intent, quite honestly. But what, you know, very, very grateful for it, because it then opened the door for me to be able to do more and to explore more. So it's been a huge privilege to get to hold some of these incredibly complicated stories and life experiences in my hands and try to be, Dorothy used the word dignity, try to sort of keep the dignity of the person, whoever the person was, intact as much as I possibly can. And to get to the humanity part of it. And to tell stories in a way where, even if it's very, very dark, I'm looking for the moments where we might recognize our humanity in someone else, even if the someone else is somebody we dislike, somebody we don't understand, somebody that we might even hate. But just allow ourselves to sit in that discomfort and in that familiarity as well of we are just people. And if we are just people, if we're choosing this type of behavior, we can also choose to not use violence. And how do we get to that? And so therefore your work, you know, was just like a light bulb for me. I just went, oh my goodness, here are people who are really, really doing it. So I'm a huge fan of what all of you do, to be honest.
Well, we can cheer each other on together. I'm happy for that.
Yes.
But you know what? One of the things that makes you unique is the style of the movies that you make, is that you're going into, you're building relationships with people who don't want relationships with you, right?
Yeah.
And I hear that in every movie when you go and say, "Can I come in and film you?" And they're like, "I don't like you," you know. But they let you. They let it
Yeah.
happen. And yeah, can you just real quickly, would you list off the movies and how what you've done so that the audience here can understand your approach to filmmaking?
Yeah. So I've done several films in the UK, excuse me, touching, for example, the very first one was the story of this young woman. I've done work on jihadis and young men from the UK that went to fight in Syria when ISIS and all that was going on around 2013. I have filmed, and then eventually I ended up coming to the US a lot, and I filmed with a lot of the militia groups in the US. I've ended up filming with white supremacists. I was at Charlottesville, for example,
Yeah,
when the
yeah.
Unite the Right rally happened. But I was there filming with the neo-Nazis, with the white supremacists. I was there, not on the other side, but inside that movement. So, I mean, my approach has always been, when I logged in, somebody was using the word sincerity. I do the work that I do because I genuinely am interested, and I really sincerely want to understand. So I think curiosity has always been what has been at the forefront of my drive, in a way. And my approach, a very deliberate approach on my part, has been to keep my judgment at the door, to try to leave it at the door, which is at times is really, really hard, but to try to, at some point, get past the facade and past the sort of slogans and chest beating and the flag waving that people want me to see and the talking points that they want to present, and eventually get to who the person really is. And in that also then means I have to bring myself into the conversation as well. I can't expect
Yeah.
somebody to share of themselves if I'm distant or I'm not willing to also go first. So my approach has always been, like you were saying, has been to try to find where we do connect and not start off with the where we disagree, because if we do that, then I'm very conscious of the fact that we will just talk past each other, and we will just score the political points or whatever points that each of us is trying to make.
Yeah.
And then we can all feel self-righteous and great and pat ourselves on the back for me being a great anti-racist, and they can pat themselves on the back for being a great Nazi. And then nothing really happened, and we just walked off and we talked to our audiences, and that was it. And that's not what I'm interested in. I'm not interested to talk to sort of the already to the echo chamber. That's to me really boring. That's not interesting. I like talking across differences, and I like trying to figure out how we manage our differences. But so I've also filmed in the US. I filmed during COVID. I filmed with anti-abortion activists and some people that were used to be a part of something called the Army of God, which was basically a terrorist organization. It was some of the guys that had blown up some of the abortion clinics and assassinated providers. And I filmed with American veterans. I saw the Veterans for Peace t-shirt a little bit earlier on. So that was the last film I just did in the US. And of course, and before that, I filmed with you guys. I wanted to look at intimate partner violence. That type of private violence. Up until that point, I'd only done more public. Well, other than Banaz, I'd done more public violence and politically, ideologically driven violence.
You know, one of the things that I think I see over and over in your work is that you literally are befriending these people, where you stay connected with them and you are making a relationship that is transformative with people. And I'm wondering, you know, if you can just talk about that when you walk into the white supremacist camp and walk out with all like the new family members, you know, and it's like, damn, how did she do that? You know, and what do you see? What's the process of making that kind of connection?
Well, so that's not the intention. So I didn't make that film with the intent of we're going to become friends. My intention was I really want to understand. I want to understand what his life experience has been. I want to understand what happened in his life, what his experiences were that brought him to sit in front of me, having done the things that he'd done and believing what he now believes. What did that take? Why? And does he, so listening for me has always been really important. I don't walk in trying to kind of convert anybody or change anybody's mind. And I think that's part of why it goes well, because they're expecting that. They're expecting me to try to out-argue them or to judge them or to yell at them. And I don't. I mostly listen. And then I do challenge them along the way wherever I see that that's possible, or I see that they can hear it and that it's not going to close them up. I want them to open as much as possible. So whatever I need to do for them to feel comfortable to come out and truly be themselves and tell me the real story, I will sit until that moment comes. Like I won't quit at 5 o'clock. I'll come back weeks after weeks after weeks and months if I have to. And then often I'll see something shift when I don't know if, I mean, you have much more experience in this than me, but I see when somebody feels like they've been truly heard, I see something shift in people's face and their body, where I find that something opens in them where they are now capable of hearing me too. And when I see that shift happen, then I start sharing more about me as a human being, not about my political views, not about blaming them or trying to shame them, but just sharing what my life has been like. And then I'll start asking, and, you know, so what do you feel when I say this? Or what do you think, you know, when I say that I used to feel really ugly, or I was really afraid when neo-Nazis used to march through this city?
Yeah.
And just try to connect on a human level. So that was my intent. Is it possible for them to recognize my humanity? And is it also possible for me to recognize theirs? Because it's not as if I didn't have a lot of baggage against them too, and a lot of fear for people like that. And what ended up happening in the process and in spending a lot of time together is that, yes, some of them ended up becoming friends, and some of them ended up leaving. One of the guys ended up leaving in the course of making the film, and then 2 others left after the film actually came out. And one of them, which was the leader of one of the largest neo-Nazi organizations in America, Jeff Scoop is his name. And he'd been in that movement for several decades, since he was a kid, basically. He's become like a brother to me now. And he's now like a vocal anti-racist campaigner. And I remember him calling me a couple of years after the film, and he's like, "Look, I'm done. I don't know what to, but I don't know what to do, and I don't know who else to talk to, and to say that to, so I'm calling you. I don't know what I'm wanting you to do, but I'm calling you."
Yeah.
And and I had to go at him a little bit, because him and I'd become could be very open to each other at that point, and I was like, you have to make up for what you've done. You gotta, you don't get a medal. I'm not going to clap for you. Yay, you're not a Nazi anymore. Yay, good for you. You need to take responsibility now.
Yeah.
And he has, and I'm so proud of him. And I will know him till my last breath. And every film has been like that. I feel like I end up sort of collecting these interesting, amazing people that become a part of my life. I'm changed by the films too.
Yeah.
It's not just that, people in the film change to some extent. Also, I do. But it doesn't always happen, but it happens. It does consistently happen with some. And that gives me a lot of hope. Gives me a lot of hope about where we are actually today in the US and in the world too. People's capacity to change.
It gives me hope watching you do what you do. It's like, oh, there it is. That's it. Look what's happening. And in the facilitation world, it's a very hard skill to just stay curious, inquisitive, in kind of a state of wonder, right? A state of, tell me more. And you watch facilitators grow in that skill of curiosity, as opposed to explaining or judging or whatever it is. It's a hard place to get to.
Yeah.
But you have a word for it, and I just love it. And I wanted to adopt it in what we are doing and how we're teaching. If I'm not mistaken, you call it extreme listening. Is that the deal?
Well, someone else called it that. Yeah. I mean, Simon
Oh,
Sinek. Yeah, he was like, yeah, so what you do is like, it's extreme listening. That's what you do. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what that is. Okay. So it is, yeah, I mean, but listening is really, the listening is at the absolute core of it. It truly, truly is. It's not the knowing the right thing to say, or even knowing where the thing is going to go, but it's really being willing. I mean, I will say I have a lot of my sort of tolerance in terms of my patience is very, very high. I have very low blood pressure, so I'm very lucky like that. So I can sit for a long time. And what I'm also very aware of is I know that many of the people that sit across from me, they want to push my buttons.
yeah,
They
yeah, yeah.
want to get a reaction out of me. So that also helps me to sort of keep my cool, actually, because I don't want to hand that over. But the listening has always been really important, and being fully present, fully being with somebody, and genuinely, with Jeff, that leader who ended up leaving. So he was the first person to agree to talk to me of the neo-Nazis. And I remember I was contacting him because I got a lot of death threats after doing a BBC interview from white supremacists, because I'd said, I'm talking about multiculturalism and defending it. And so I wanted to reach out to people like that to see if it's possible to whether they'll sit down with me too, or if they'll just send me anonymous death threats, basically. And he was one of the first people who responded and didn't just shut me down. So I pushed him a lot, and I kept asking. And then he finally said, he's like, okay, you can come to this specific motel in outside Detroit. And he said, you get 1 hour, and after that, you're going to piss off. You're just going to leave me alone, and you're never going to contact me again. And just stop contacting me. And I was like, okay, fine. Yes, I'll take it. Fine. And so we, myself and one colleague, I just work with, one other person.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not like I have a huge team or security or anything like that. So it was myself and my colleague setting up the cameras and everything in this strange motel outside Detroit. And then suddenly I start going, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Like, what if he comes? I'm in the US. What if he's got guns? What if he doesn't come alone? What if he brings a bunch of guys? What if they rob us? Like they come and they beat us and they take the cameras and like, what if? Like suddenly I start going, oh, and he knocks on the door and I open the door and there he is. And it was just him. And he, comes and he sits down and we talk for 1 hour, we talk for 2 hours, talk to 3 hours, and we sat for 5 hours and we're still talking. And I even asked him, I was like, you told me to disappear and piss off after an hour. What happened? Like, what happened? Why am I still here, basically? And he said, I find talking to you really interesting. He said, I've never been asked some of the questions that you're asking.
Yeah.
And he said, so I'm having to think, which in a different way. And he said, and I find that really interesting. And he said, but I want to be really clear. He said, I despise your worldview. And he said, I will spend the rest of my life working against the kind of world that you and the kind of future that you're working for. He said, but I respect that you're sincere. And he said, in what you believe. And he said, and I respect that you care. He said, you care about the wrong stuff, but he said, but I respect that you care, which I thought was really interesting, right? So we had this kind of bizarre, not respect for each, but this kind of almost like, okay, you believe your thing, but at least you believe something. So that kind of spoke to him. That was important to him.
That's right.
Even though it was all the wrong stuff, I believed. But yeah, and then he said, do you want to, actually, why don't we continue talking? Because I'm really tired now. Why don't you join us? Our group's going to go to this rally in Virginia. And, you can join us. And I was like, yeah, of course.
Now,
and I mean,
now
I didn't even think, yeah, sure.
Can I pause you right there?
Of
Because
course.
if Dorothy was going to meet somebody like that in a hotel in Detroit, I would have something to say about that.
Well,
I
I
would
didn't
be
tell
like,
anyone.
what are you talking about?
No, but I didn't tell anyone. I didn't, because some really dicey stuff also ended up happening in the course of making the film. And I remember, I mean, like one of the kind of worst things that I always share with people is after. So, because this thing that he said, the rally I could come to, I thought I had been to another white supremacist event or whatever in Virginia just a few weeks before that, and it was literally just like 4 or 5 like kind of toothless KKK members with like some placards and some flags, and I was like, oh, that's all it's going to be, fine. Yeah, of course I'll come. And of course, I get there and it's thousands of people. And it was all the white supremacist group from all over the US, and they were armed. And it was just, and it descended into violence. And Heather Hare ended up losing her life. And it just became very, very ugly. But after that, we managed to get away. And then the same, earlier that evening, basically, after the rally, one of the guys, neo-Nazis that we were with, he's like, oh, you can come and you can film at this compound and all the groups will be there. And I've got permission, you can come and film. And I was like, wow, yay, okay, great. I'll get to, so let's do that.
Wow.
We're driving in the mountains of Virginia and we get there and I want to take out the camera from the car. And my colleague goes, let's just wait. Let's just go look. And then we can come back. And I was like, no, Brian says it's fine. Let's just get the cameras and we go. And he's like, no, let's just look first. And I said, okay, well, you're being extra, uptight. That's fine. So we leave the cameras and we start walking down this dirt road. And there are a bunch of guys start gathering at the bottom. Some of them are topless and have bruises on their bodies from the fights earlier. Some of them are holding beers, and the only thing I can describe it as is weapons that belong on a battlefield. And they start screaming and shouting, going, who the F are you? Who the F are you? Put your effing hands up. Put your effing hands up. And I only had my cell phone in my hand, and we get down. They separate me and my colleague. One group is shouting at him, another group is shouting at me, and Brian, who was with us, who's kind of our guy, he disappears. And I just go, wow, this is it. And they're just yelling and screaming and being so aggressive. And I remember looking at my phone and it says no signal. And I just remember thinking, this is where it ends. They're going to put a bullet in my head. They're going to put me in the ground. And what was really bothersome to me is I hadn't told any colleagues. You're saying, why would you show up in a motel or whatever? And I was just going, I haven't told my colleagues, I haven't told my parents, I haven't told anybody. that I'm here. So not only am I going to die now, but nobody's going to find me because they're not going to know what I did. And eventually Brian comes back and he negotiates for us to be allowed to leave. So we managed to leave. And so that afternoon at some Motel 6 or something, I remember typing a bunch of messages to my colleagues back in London going, look, here's my mother's number, here's my brother's number. If you don't hear from me, you
Oh
contact
my
them.
God.
You let them know. So it was, it was very, very intense. Very, very intense period of
You
filming.
know, yeah, I can only imagine. And surely somebody in your inner circle was like, Deeyah, have you lost your mind? What are you
Yes,
doing?
yes. But I didn't tell too many of them because if I do, that's what they would do. And they try to talk me out of it. So I just didn't tell
You
them.
just go do it. Yeah.
No, I'll just
So
do it and
I,
I'll tell them after. And even with the jihadi film, like, with the Muslim extremists, like I remember showing it to my mother when it was finished. And she just looked at me. I was like, so did you like it? And she just goes, how dare you? And I was like, what do you mean, how dare? She's like, how dare you put me through this? How dare you do this to me? And I was going, what do you mean do this to you? It's like,
yeah,
why would you sit with guys like that? Look at them. Look at them. Why did you sit with them? And I was like, well, it's all done now. Did you like it? And she's like, shut up. I didn't like it. Well, she said, well, actually, it is really good. But don't you ever do that to me again. Don't you go sit with men like that again. I was like, well, this is why I don't tell you. I tell you at the end,
yeah.
you know?
So you
So
go
no.
and you find other people like that to sit with and film. And
Yeah.
I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and
Oh,
you know,
sorry. Yes. Sorry.
no,
Sorry. Yes.
you're fine. I just want to get to the battering intervention film,
Yeah.
and because one of the things that you said while we're sitting in the garage was, I think that we need to get the men's voices
Yeah.
into the world. And
Yeah.
you were looking for men who would talk and share their story and talk about their behavior.
Yeah.
And you found men, and and I just wonder, what was that like for you? What was the takeaway from that? What would you want, a gathering of those in the domestic violence world to glean from your experience? Just talk about it a little bit.
It was really, so having done a lot of work with women who are on the receiving end of violence like that, and also having very, very long standing friendships and collaborations with women who provide support for women who are escaping violence like that. Um, with the years, I became really clear to me that if we are to address this issue, we can't only look at one side of the whole picture. We have to also look at the perpetrator side of it. Otherwise, it's incomplete to me as an outsider from this world. Um, and also, there's only so many shelters we can build. There's only so many women we can hide and try to keep safe from abusers when he's just going to move on to the next and the next and the next, and in the process the violence getting and the abuse getting worse and worse. So what do we do? So that's why I was, and also I wanted to make sure that people, because I also tried to speak to some guys in the UK and they wouldn't speak. They absolutely wouldn't speak. And they said, I'll only speak if you blur my face. And I said, no, it's really important to show faces. It's really not to shame people, but really it's important to humanize these topics, I think. And it's really important not to create sort of this picture of these are those monsters that you'll never understand. This is so far-fetched and so crazy that there's nothing we can do about this because they're just monsters with horns. And they're not. There are brothers, there are fathers, there are uncles, they are men in our streets, in our churches. So it was really important for me to humanize them. But the process itself, it was uncomfortable. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's probably been one of the most uncomfortable films in that sense, which is interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, when I think about why was that, I think when I filmed with neo-Nazis and I filmed with jihadis or militia guys or terrorists, or I think I'm not saying I could understand them. I'm saying I could kind of find some reasons and go, okay, I see what you are thinking. I can see
Yeah.
that. And what I could see is that their victims or the target of their violence or their hatred were people that they didn't know. So there was a huge distance
Oh, yeah.
between them and the people that they were targeting. To me, the reason why this film was different is that there wasn't that distance there. If he is able to do that with somebody he says he loves, somebody he shares a bed with, somebody he might even share children with, and shares his life with, and he can do that to her, then this is a whole nother category of human.
Different. Yeah.
This is different, right?
Yeah, that's a great point.
So it was uncomfortable for me.
Mhm.
Um, and then I remember speaking to a survivor, a woman who's experienced violence from her partner for many, many years.
Mhm.
And I said, what should I be thinking about? What should I, how do I kind of relate to this or center myself in this? And she said, like center myself inside myself and not in the story. And she said, look, the trigger, and I said, is there something I can ask that might be like that will set the whole thing off wrong? Like, can I end up
Mm.
saying something that might provoke or that might just not be a good thing to do? And she said, no. She said, that's not the problem. She said, the trigger is not that. The trigger is not you. She said, the trigger is intimacy,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting
Mhm.
because I hadn't really thought of it like that.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but then when you're building that relationship of sitting with each other and having someone share their experiences, you are building intimacy. Even as an
That's right.
interviewer, there's not obviously to the same level, but there's something there.
That's right.
So I was aware of that too, going, okay, so how do I walk in this? How do I do this? So it was an uncomfortable film for me to do. It was hard to do, very, very hard to do. Uh, but I think I've learned a lot from it, and it's opened my eyes to a lot of what's missing in our society, in
Mm.
terms of a response that's more meaningful and useful and can truly shift what we're up against. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And what was coming up in my mind when I've watched this film 15 times at least,
Mm,
is that many of the people in the film are people that were in my groups. They're in my
yeah.
program. They were, I was connected with them and I knew them, on a pretty intimate level. But you were able to get them to talk about things that I'd never heard.
Really?
And it was really, really remarkable that your approach, maybe the camera, the extreme listening, your curiosity. Yeah, they were saying things that's like I had no idea. I didn't know that.
Really? I
It
didn't
was
know that.
it was wonderful. And I thought, oh, we need cameras in the room. We need extreme listening in the room. We got to revamp everything because I missed a
Hmm.
bunch of stuff that they suddenly were openly sharing with you. And I loved it. I loved it. It's like, oh, there's another doorway into
Hmm.
helping them share their stories. And so, how do you think that
Why
is
is
it?
that? I wonder.
Well, one, I think they knew that they were coming to tell their story.
Yes.
And I think they certainly understood, I'm going to go see Dia and she's looking for me she's trying to get something. And I
Yeah.
think they really wanted to deliver for you. I think that was important for them. But
Yeah.
there's also, I am sure, the way you approach relationships, connection, the extreme listening that helped them to settle in and then go down the rabbit holes. It's just marvelous. Um,
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. That's
mhm,
interesting. Um, yeah. It was
mhm,
it was very, very intense.
mhm.
Yeah. And then I would sit and then I would question myself also, uh to listen and watch, kind of listen and also read and go, is that true? Is it what he just is that true? Because he's also reading me, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
many of the guys are incredibly astute
Mhm.
in how to relate around, maneuver, like the whole dynamic between
Mhm.
people. So that was also, I think I was extra kind of alert in many ways of going, I want to make sure I don't miss it, want to make sure I
Mhm.
don't, look past something that I should catch, for example. Um, yeah. Yeah, I learned so much. I learned so much. And then also what was interesting for me is looking at the different approaches that you have. David Adams in on the East
Mhm.
Coast has, um, and some of your other colleagues also, Synergy in Kansas.
Mhm.
So that was also interesting for me to see what some, like you're saying, the different doors through which this can be approached and the different kind of ways of holding it and holding the process also, I think is really interesting. And I mean,
Yeah.
I just the kind of the conclusion in a way, again, coming at it from an activist point of view and wanting to do this not for the sake of making films, but for the sake of, so, okay, so what do we do? Or what else can we do? I mean, I'm left with, and I think I said this to both you and Dorothy as well, I'm very, very clearly left with the feeling that we have to get into schools. We have to start on this much, much earlier because
Yeah.
further down the line, then we're just picking up pieces. So in order to kind of inoculate and protect and fortify our young people, both the boys and the girls, I think we've got to start having these conversations early, super, super early. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm extremely interested in working on. In fact, I would give up film for that.
Wow, that'd be amazing. Coincidentally, Spencer just this morning gave a very good talk, speakingly about, how to get to younger people and how we need to
Yeah.
be engaging, socializing, and so
Yes.
that's a nice, important theme today, and we believe that for a long time. The men in our program are constantly saying, "I wish I had this earlier."
Mm,
And we have a justice involved youth program going, which is really exciting. And all of them are saying, no one's ever taught me this. I didn't know this. And, the roads go back to early, early, early. And
yeah.
we're still not early enough yet. We're still
No.
cleaning up the pieces with, teenagers. And so,
Exactly. And one
mhm.
of the things that's quite striking to me is having approached violence and different forms of violence for so many years now, it's really apparent to me that if we address both the emotional kind of landscape and the inner parts of our kids and our young people, but also I think the cultural and systemic issues that we also have, and especially the cultural aspect as well, I think a lot of the issues that I've touched on, a lot of them actually intersect and connect with each other. So
I
the
think so.
private to the public, like most terrorists, there's some research, excuse me, that came out in the UK where they found that if you're looking for patterns on terrorism, very, very many of the people that committed public violence had practiced at home first. So
Hmm.
you will very often find patterns of violence in the home
Mhm.
towards their partner often. Like the Orlando shooter, I think he was violent. Like very, very many of the cases actually showed that. So there's some real links that are worth exploring. But also, if you look at the political circumstances in the world, but it's very, very
Yeah.
glaringly, obviously in the US right now. I mean, you look at people like Elon Musk, who, is obsessing over the grooming and violation and abuse and violence against uh, girls in the UK at the hands
Mm.
of, he calls it Muslim grooming gangs. He's obsessed with that. And he keeps, talking about that and how that's a civilizational issue and all of this kind of stuff. Yet the grooming of the Epstein. I mean, I'm not trying to go into all the politics,
Mhm.
but the grooming of these girls and the sexual violence and the rape and the abuse and the violence that they've experienced, he's like lost his tongue on that. And it's interesting to me how culturally the color or the religion or the ethnicity of the perpetrator becomes the focus. not the fact. So that defines whether the suffering of those particular women and girls is worthy of justice and worthy of our condemnation and our disgust or not. So that hypocrisy and those double standards I just find despicable and I think are really important to unpick. So I think we live in a culture now and a cultural moment right now where I think the dehumanization of women and girls is become even more okay than before. But I think just the dehumanization in every direction is becoming so prominent. And this concept of what it means to be a man and the domination and power and abuse and violence and the biggest army and the biggest gun and the biggest, all this kind of violent framing of it all is noteworthy and should light a fire under everybody that we need to really unpick this stuff because it's all connected. To me, it's not, we've got, violence against, women here, we've got terrorism here, we've got political stuff here. It's all like that. And what our young people are absorbing, it's all connected too. Anti-immigrant, anti-woman, anti-gay, anti, it's all lumped together in one thing now. And the racist kind of packaging, misogynist packaging, it's all bound up. So to unpick it all now is the task, while humanizing, while refusing to give up on our shared humanity, while refusing to give up hope, while refusing to give up on each other.
What a challenge.
Yeah. But you're doing it. But you're doing the work, all of you.
Well, it feels like such a drop in the bucket, but we love what we're doing. But we're having this conversation about people who just don't care. That doesn't matter. I don't care what happens to me. I don't care what I do to others. And I started asking the people, so when was it that you stopped giving a shit? Right. And they would go back to a certain age, and then I would just ask them, so what happened to you at that moment when you stopped giving a shit? And almost to a person, I would say to a person, but that feels a little grandizing. They were talking about somebody's death. Dad's death, dad killing mom, brother getting shot on the streets, brother dying on a car wreck, whatever. It's like they were overwhelmed with this intense sadness. And the way they decided to manage it was to not give a shit anymore.
Yeah.
And it was such and that was really, whether it was the kids, whether it was the men in our community group, the people, when they were talking about that, it was overwhelming grief that they just had no way to be able to cope with. And I wonder if that's not in there. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I agree with you. I think, time and time and time and time again, the lack of support and the lack of tools and just knowing, what do I do with this stuff that life has done to me? What do I do with it? Where do I put it? Like how do I survive myself and this thing, whatever that thing is for different people? I remember when I was filming the jihadis, I found myself, I had a lot of kind of feelings against them and doing the film and sitting with guys like that. It was sort of the first time I'd done that. And then we're sitting and we're talking, and some of the guys, they're telling me about their life, and they're, I felt, I've experienced racism, and I experienced this, and I experienced that, and, I never felt good enough for this and good enough for, and I remember sitting there going, oh my goodness, me too. Yeah, oh my goodness, I used to feel like that. Yeah, I felt like, wow. And then I would always be left with, at the end of this, which really surprised me, first of all, that we had so much more in common than I'd realized. But at the end of conversations like that, I was always left with, okay, so then what is it then? Why do you pick up a gun? And I always say, why do you pick up a gun and why did I pick up a camera? If our experiences are so similar. And not only that, but on top of that, I grew up a girl child. I had all that stuff in addition to everything you just said that you had too. So why do I do that and you go and destroy things, including yourself? And it bothered me, this question, for such a long time. And I've asked so many people, and we might have even talked about this at some point, but where I sort of landed and where I finally realized, oh my goodness. And that's when I realized the reason I picked up the camera is because I had a very loving mother. I've had mentors in my life. I've had women and people that have shown up in my life when I have been at my most broken, when I've been the most lost. There have been people that have stood up for me and stood with me, who wish me well, versus him. When he was at his most broken, the people that showed up were recruiters and people who recognized his pain and said, you know what, I can make use of this. And they exploited and weaponized his hurt
Yes.
and directed
Yes.
it towards their own gain, towards
That's
their
right.
own politics, towards their own violence, towards their own wars. And that's despicable. But it also says something about us as a society. We weren't there.
Where were
We
we? That's
weren't there.
right. That's
They were
right.
there. They see it. And the neo-Nazis said the same thing to me. They said, some of the recruiters, they said, Jeff said, he said, yeah, we'd look for the little guy. We'd look for the kid that was being bullied. We'd look for the kid who was lost or insecure or was struggling at home. We'd target him for recruitment because we could put our arm around him. We can accept him. We can protect him. We can give him a brotherhood. We can give him meaning and purpose and direction. And I'm just sat there thinking, oh my goodness. So what are we doing? And I remember, when all the jihadi stuff was going on, all the governments had like, oh, we're going to de-radicalize. And they had all these kind of stupid programs that did nothing, where they'd have, oh yeah, we're engaging with de-radicalizing. And they'd sit on their little computers on social media and try to engage with some of these kids. Whereas on the other end of it, the people that were radicalizing and recruiting them would sit there day and night. They would spend hundreds of hours on each child to build loyalty, to build trust, to build love. And it wasn't, let's come and cut people's heads off. That wasn't what they went for. They went for talking about the girlfriend, talking about your dad not being there, to all the stuff that they actually needed. So to me, all of this comes down to human needs that we all have that aren't being met, that we will all find ways of meeting. So we'll either find destructive ways of meeting those needs, or we will find productive ways of becoming an activist or trying, picking up cameras or doing intervention work or doing civil rights work, whatever, expression we find, or we can go beat on something.
Right.
Or we can go strap a bomb to ourselves, right?
James Henderson was just talking this morning about building these connections and communities and perceived social supports inside of our program. And it's so connected to what you're saying because, we've kind of had this belief that if we just do an hour and a half class a week, that somehow these guys are going to stop beating their partners and everything. And we're going to have to do way more than that. We're going to have to be pursuing connections and have to help them find connections outside of us. And I'm not sure we're anywhere close to that yet.
Well, but looking at the kind of political circumstances that we're in now, I sometimes do think that maybe what comes from this is, as much as all the systems are kind of shattering and all the trust is shattering and all the kind of hypocrisies and double standards are being laid bare now, but maybe what comes from that is, rather than apathy and kind of hopelessness and I'll just pull back and just hope all of this goes away, maybe what happens is that the change comes from us. Maybe what's needed now is that we will be there for each other. We will build alternative communities and alternative ways of being with each other now. And we will support each other. We will love each other. We will hide each other and do whatever it is, build the underground railroads now, whatever it is that we need to do, be there for each other's kids. Maybe that's what's needed. And maybe that can help ignite something that, as a side effect, all this other stuff also in a way gets addressed, that maybe we wake up and we realize that it's okay to care about each other. And that not only is it okay to care about each other, maybe that's what this moment is asking of us. And maybe that's what's been missing. And maybe that's why these voids and these heartaches that we've all had have been filled with so much toxicity and poison. And maybe we now need to fill it with love and caring for each other and not expect it from the top. It's not going to come from there. They're showing us it's not going to come from there. It has to come from us.
That's right. Deeyah, I would be very happy to have this conversation go on for quite some time. but there happens to be a bunch of people in this room that would,
Of
I
course.
think, love to maybe ask a couple of
Oh,
questions to
sure.
you.
Deeyah, I am wondering if there are any people or influences you've drawn on for encouraging or enhancing your curiosity. Was there one that was more profound for you? And that comes from Max in Topeka.
Thank you. That's a really good question, Max. Wishing that when I was younger, wishing that somebody would just listen and wishing that somebody would take the time to engage properly and fully. I think I know what it feels like to be underestimated, and I think I've always known what it feels like to be dehumanized. So I've never wanted to do that to somebody else. And I think wanting to practice something different and see if it leads somewhere else, somewhere different too, has always been part of what I'm curious about. But really, I want to know why. I'm just obsessively, I'm less interested in some ways what people do. I'm more interested in, well, why does somebody do that?
Mm-hmm.
And stories. I mean, what somebody's story is. And I think the curiosity also comes from trying to learn more about myself, about what it means to be a human being. And so I think getting into all these very extreme conversations teaches me too. It's very extreme, but it also then teaches me that if we can do this in these very extreme circumstances, we should be able to talk to our uncle who has problematic views, or we should be able to engage with people who vote differently than us, or who believe differently than us. So I think it's the curiosity comes from hoping and believing that something better is possible. And in that, I have to learn more. So what better way to learn than to sit with people directly rather than reading about them? I'd rather, or watching about them, I'd rather go sit with people and hear firsthand what it is. I don't want somebody else's filter,
Deeyah, I'll pop in while others may be thinking, but a professor of mine once said that it's the devil's bargain to think that you've got to cut a deal with them now because they're more powerful and the forces of good will just not show up for you. But if we look around, the forces of good are much more numerous and much more powerful. They're just not as well organized. Destruction is easy, but building stuff takes work. Yes. And I hope you don't consider abandoning your work right now to work with children, because telling that story and giving stories of hope and letting us see in a public way just how true it is that cooperation works better than competition, that these alternate stories are there. Could you talk about that as perhaps as part of your mission as an educator?
Well, I do. A lot of my friends ask me, why do you go into so much darkness? Like, are you looking for horror stories? Is that kind of, is that your focus? You're looking for the darkness? And I said, actually, no, it's not. What I'm actually looking for is, in all of the darkness, there's always some kind of light, some kind of hope. And part of the reason why I tend to listen so intently is I'm trying to listen for that, and I'm looking for that. And wherever that is, to me, shows me sort of the gap or the crack where the possibility of a solution or something different is. So yeah, I mean, to me, hope is everything, and seeing that there is light even in darkness is exceptionally important. And that's the purpose of what I actually do. It's not to revel in the darkness; it's to go into the darkness, because we have to understand, and we're faced with it. So you have to go into it. But the purpose is not to end there. If I end there, then there's no hope. So to me, I keep going and keep going. And I'm always in every film going, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And very often it's in people like all of you. I always find these people who are doing something about it. If they're doing it on a big scale, on an intimate, smaller scale, just one-on-one, whatever way they've chosen, they're doing it. And it shows that if they're doing it, we can also do it in whatever our own context and our own circumstances are, or whatever issues we care about. But that that willingness to take action and to do something in service of something better, I think is life-saving.